Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are opening up what I like to call the ultimate medical cold case. And honestly, it's one that is eventually going to affect every single one of us. We're asking the big one. What actually happens in the human brain when we die? Now, for centuries, right, this has been a subject entirely reserved for philosophy or religion or, late-night speculation with your friends. But recently, modern science has literally stepped right into the resuscitation room. We're not talking about anecdotes anymore. We are going to look at the hard forensic evidence and the peer-reviewed clinical data that is completely, and I mean completely, upending everything we thought we knew about the final moments of human life.
So traditionally, medical science told us a pretty straightforward, albeit grim, story. We were taught that when the heart stops, the brain flatlines within seconds, and consciousness is simply extinguished. Kind of like flipping off a light bulb. Click, and it's dark. But because of new technology and rigorous monitoring, we are now facing a massive neuroscientific paradox. Think about it. How can a brain that has seemingly ceased all physiological functioning, a brain that is completely devoid of oxygen, somehow produce incredibly vivid, lucid, and, most importantly, verifiable memories? How can someone whose brain is effectively offline report seeing and hearing real, actual events occurring around them? It just doesn't make sense with the old light bulb analogy.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the near-death mystery, then break down the first aware study, examine the challenge of proof, look at surges in the dying brain, cover the aware 2 discoveries, and finally redefine the final moments. Okay, let's dive right into section 1, the near-death mystery. A lot of our core data today comes from a monumental piece of research called the AWARE study. That stands for Awareness During Resuscitation, and it was published in the highly respected peer-reviewed medical journal Resuscitation. Led by Dr. Sam Parnia, this wasn't just a small, isolated project. This was a massive, multi-hospital clinical study that set out to investigate consciousness and the brain during actual cardiac arrest. We're talking about a massive logistical effort spanning 15 different hospitals across the US, the UK, and Austria. The ultimate goal here was to finally, once and for all, test the validity of near-death experiences. And specifically, they wanted to test those famous out-of-body perceptions, but they wanted to do it using a strictly controlled scientific environment. No more guesswork.
Moving on to section 2, the first AWARE study. Let's look at how they actually tested this.
Okay, so how do you scientifically prove someone was floating outside their body? Well, you set a trap. It's actually brilliant. Researchers essentially installed between 50 and 100 hidden shelves near the ceilings in specific hospital areas where cardiac arrests were statistically likely to occur. We're talking emergency rooms, acute medical wards, places like that. On top of each shelf, they placed a specific secret image. These are things like nationalistic symbols, pictures of animals, even distinct newspaper headlines. But here is the genius catch. These images were only visible if you were literally floating up near the ceiling, looking down. From the floor or the bed, you couldn't see a thing. It was essentially the ultimate scientific test, a physical trap for claims of patients floating near the ceiling and watching their own resuscitations unfold. But as anyone in research knows, science is an incredibly tough, grueling process. The math here is staggering. Out of over 2,000 cardiac arrests recorded during the study, well, the sad reality is the vast majority did not survive. So out of 2,060, only 140 patients survived and were eligible to even participate. Of those 140, only 101 were physically and mentally well enough to be interviewed by the researchers. From that 101, only 9 patients reported an actual near-death experience, or NDE, and out of those 9, only one single patient had a verifiable visual and auditory recall. Think about that for a second. Over 2,000 events filtered all the way down to a single verifiable case. That is a massive statistical drop-off, basically finding a needle in a haystack of needles. So what did the other survivors actually experience? Interestingly, the researchers identified 7 widely varying cognitive themes. And let me tell you, it wasn't all white tunnels and peaceful clouds like you see in the movies. Sure, some saw bright lights or encountered deceased family members, which is common, but others experienced profound fear. Some saw animals, like lions and tigers, literally. Or they even felt a terrifying sense of violence or persecution, like the sensation of being dragged through deep water. Some experienced intense déjà vu. This entirely breaks the Hollywood stereotype of what a near-death experience is supposed to be. It's complex, it's messy, and it's highly individual. But let's get back to that one heavily verified case, because this is where the story gets really thrilling. This single case completely validates the patient's consciousness beyond a reasonable doubt. We have a 57-year-old man who vividly recalled floating up to the corner of the room during his own resuscitation. From up there, he heard an automated voice say, "Shock the patient." He looked down at the chaotic scene and saw a nurse and another man he specifically described as a bald, chunky fellow wearing blue scrubs and a blue hat. Now the Grady part, the next day, he recognized the exact bald man who had attended to him. The medical records corroborated every single detail he gave. Even the exact audio prompts from the automated external defibrillator matched his memory perfectly. And based on the machine's strict timing logs, this patient accurately recalled up to 3 full minutes of conscious awareness. 3 minutes. All while his brain was supposedly completely flatlined and devoid of activity.
Let's look at Section 3, the challenge of proof. So, despite that incredible medically verified case, there was a major catch for the researchers. That specific cardiac arrest happened in a non-acute area of the hospital, meaning there was no hidden shelf installed in that particular room, so he couldn't verify a secret image. This led to some really rigorous scientific critique of the study's design. Researchers Robert and Suzanne Mays pointed out that the strict experimental model, waiting for cardiac arrest to happen in the exact right room, having the patient actually survive, and then having them float up and look at the exact shelf, had a miraculously low 0.002% chance of success. It's almost an impossible standard. They argued instead for what's called a phenomenological approach. This means rather than relying solely on hidden visual targets almost no one will ever look at, we should rigorously analyze all free-range verified perceptions patients naturally report during a crisis. If a patient accurately describes a hidden medical tool used on them while flatlined, that should count as verifiable proof, even if they didn't see a picture of a tiger on a shelf.
Moving to Section 4, surges in the dying brain. Let's look at the objective measurements. To really grasp what's happening physiologically, we need to talk about gamma waves. If you're not familiar, gamma waves are essentially the fastest brainwave activity we have. You can think of them as the high-definition TV of brain activity. They are strongly, definitively associated with high-level consciousness, vivid dreaming, intense memory retrieval, and altered states of reality. Keep this specific brainwave in mind, because researchers at Michigan Medicine decided to hook up monitors and look for these exact waves in the dying brain. What they found is absolutely mind-blowing. In a study of 4 comatose patients who were removed from life support after a cardiac arrest, 2 of them, half the group, showed something that textbook medicine would tell you is impossible: a massive coordinated surge in gamma wave activity. And it wasn't just random static happening anywhere. This surge happened right in the brain's hot zone in the back of the brain. That is the exact neural junction perfectly correlated with consciousness, dreaming, and visual hallucinations. So let that sink in. The oxygen supply is cut off. The life support is gone. The brain wasn't just shutting down quietly into the dark. It was literally firing up. This exact phenomenon creates what Dr. George Mashore, the founding director of the Michigan Center for Consciousness Science, calls a true neuroscientific paradox. As he puts it, how can vivid experience emerge from a dysfunctional brain during the process of dying? It challenges the most fundamental assumption in biology that without oxygen, the brain simply turns off. Instead, we're seeing the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree right at the threshold of death. Let's move on to Section 5, the aware eye discoveries. Armed with these incredible new questions, science doubled down. An even bigger, highly coordinated multi-center study spanning the US and the UK was launched, known as AWARE-2. This time, they got even more proactive. By putting EEG monitors directly on the heads of patients actively receiving CPR, researchers found something spectacular. Nearly 40% of a monitored subset had their brain activity actually returning to normal or near normal from a completely flatlined state. And we aren't just talking about a faint blip. They captured highly organized spikes across the entire board: gamma, delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves. And incredibly, they captured these spikes sometimes up to an hour into ongoing CPR. Imagine the physical chaos of CPR for an hour. Yet beneath it all, the brain was secretly generating the exact electrical markers of higher mental function, all while the patient was, by all clinical definitions, completely dead. And I want to be really clear here. These spikes aren't just random background noise or monitor glitches. Published in the official journal of the European Resuscitation Council, the AWARE-2 study revealed that 4 in 10 survivors actually recalled some degree of consciousness during their CPR. 4 in 10. This is stuff that just isn't captured by standard medical measures or casual observation. It proves that this phenomenon is definitely not just an isolated anomaly or a fluke. It is a shared, deeply measurable human experience. As the lead investigator, Dr. Sam Parnia concluded, The brain can show signs of electrical recovery long into ongoing CPR. This is a massive game changer. It completely, utterly shatters the old textbook rule that the brain suffers permanent, irreversible damage just 10 minutes after the heart stops supplying it with oxygen. It turns out the human brain is far more resilient, far more robust, and infinitely more mysterious than we ever gave it credit for. Finally, Section 6, redefining the final moments. So what does this all mean when we put it together? Synthesizing all this forensic, clinical, and subjective evidence, researchers now hypothesize a biological process called disinhibition. Basically, during our normal waking lives, our brain actively filters out a massive amount of information so we can function. It has a braking system. But when the brain flatlines, it removes its natural braking systems. The filters drop. This opens access to an incredibly lucid recall of all stored life memories, often evaluated from a deep perspective of morality and meaning. And based on the verified data and the hard EEG scans we've seen, the researchers make one thing absolutely clear. These experiences are entirely distinct from hallucinations, drug-induced illusions, or simple dreams. It is a highly organized, unique state of consciousness that occurs right on the edge of death. So I'll leave you with this. Based on those impossible EEG spikes, the medically verified out-of-body recalls, and the incredibly consistent narratives from survivors, is death not a sudden off switch, but rather the uncovering of a totally new dimension of human consciousness? The rigorous scientific evidence we've explored today forces us to completely rethink where the line between life and death actually is. Thank you for exploring this incredible medical mystery with me today on The Explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.